Is Judaism true? Does the Jewish God exist? That's the claim, but when it comes down to demonstrating it, the Jews are no better at it than any of their religious cousins. But of course, we have to give them a chance to prove it, right? So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. Toss out enough rope for our intrepid rabbi here to hang himself with, because this is not going to go well for him. And I trust that no one is at all surprised. We don't really look at Judaism very often, not because we couldn't, but because I don't often stumble across any good videos worth looking at. This one seems like a very old video, although it was only published last year. It's just the production value is pretty poor, so I apologize for that up front. I did what I could, but, you can only work with what you've got. Anyway, here's a 4-minute video bloated out of context by my commentary where a rabbi tries to explain why the Jewish view of God must be real. And he doesn't do any better than any other religious apologists ever do. So, let's get to it.
The key principles of Judaism, creation, revelation, and redemption, provide us with 3 pathways in which to encounter God. So let's take first creation.
Well, let me stop you right there for a second, because this is really a problem when you're talking to a religious person and they simply assume that their religion is true without ever demonstrating that it's actually true. Because if you're talking to somebody who isn't Jewish in this case, or who isn't Christian, or who isn't Muslim or Hindu or whatever, you can't just make that assumption, at least not if you want to be taken seriously. You've got to be able to step back and start at the beginning and show how you've reached that conclusion rationally. Now, of course, the religious never ever do that. They don't even try. They've never tested their beliefs intellectually to see if they comport with objective reality. It's all about faith, and faith isn't remotely impressive to anybody but the faithful. So we're already starting off with an issue that the religious simply aren't interested in addressing. And that's kind of a problem, isn't it?
One of the greatest scientists of our time, Lord Martin Rees, former Astronomer Royal, President of the Royal Society, Master of Trinity College, Cambridge, one of the greatest scientists in the world, in his book Just 6 Numbers, points out that the entire existence of the universe depends on 6 mathematical constants, which have to be so precise that the probability of any combustible source of energy coalescing around those 6 constants is almost infinitesimally small.
And that isn't remotely true. This is where we see that they're starting off with a lot of unevidenced assumptions that they will never ever address. In fact, if you ask them about said assumptions, they will just make excuses for why their assumptions are true and valid, even though they're demonstrably not. So let's talk about them for a second, because this really is important. First off, the assumption that said that 6 numbers could have been any different. Well, we don't know that. Granted, we don't know that they couldn't have been, and that's really kind of the issue. We have exactly one universe to go by, and we can't be making assumptions about what things could have been like, because we just don't know. You can't say, well, this combination of numbers is important, because you don't know if it is or not. Maybe that's the only combination that any universe could ever have had. Maybe it could have been absolutely anything, and we could have come up with something completely different in the end had it turned out different. Yet this is another case of the religious finding the hits and totally ignoring the misses because they're just trying to defend their preconceived conclusion instead of pursuing the best conclusion that you can reach from the available evidence at hand. Secondly, they're letting their emotions get in the way of their intellect. They assert that life is important. Why? I mean, the universe doesn't care if life is here or not, does it? Physics does what physics does, whether there's life or not. The religious are desperately trying to get to us because they think that we're important. They are self-important to themselves. Everything must revolve around us, except it doesn't. It just doesn't. If the physical constants had been different, if they could have been different at all, then whatever might have come about, it would have come about in accordance with those new physical constants. Whether there was life or whether there wasn't, well, that doesn't really matter. We're here because that's the way the universe was. We're here in the form that we are because that's what the physical constants happen to allow. Whether we are part of the equation or not, that's totally irrelevant. We're just not that hot.
So the universe is finely tuned for the emergence of life. It could not have happened by mere chance.
Then why is the overwhelming majority of the universe completely deadly to our form of life, to any form of life that we're actually aware of? Why is the vast majority of Earth completely off limits to humanity without technological means? Because these are the questions that they just don't want to talk about. If we hadn't become a technological species, we'd still be limited to a very narrow range of habitats near the equator. Anywhere else would be too cold, too harsh, too wet, too dry, you name it, it wouldn't be right for us. The idea that the universe is finely tuned for anything at all is absurd. It might be fine-tuned for black holes, but that's about it. The idea that it's meant for life when virtually everywhere we look is clearly deadly to life, that makes the whole claim just entirely stupid.
Equally, the emergence of life itself from inanimate matter is both inherently mysterious and goes against one of the fundamental principles of entropy, which is that the world is any system gradually loses energy and order.
And apparently, you don't understand basic science. Now, this is really common among the religious because all of them use this very common and ridiculous falsehood. Entropy increases only within a closed system. Go look up the second law of thermodynamics. I walked through that a video or two ago because it doesn't work that way when you actually understand what you're talking about. The Earth is not a closed system. Look up. See that big round thing in the sky? The thing that's really bright and hot? Yeah, that's the sun. We get tons of energy from the sun. If we were a closed system, no life could exist. All plant life would die, everything would break down. This is just an absurd misunderstanding of reality because the rabbi here doesn't really know what the hell he's talking about, nor, I suspect, does he actually care. He spends his time studying mythology, not reality, and when he's trying desperately to defend his irrational beliefs, the best he can do is present an argument that bears absolutely no resemblance to the real world. Because these people, they're just not concerned. Sad, isn't it?
Now, biology works in the exactly opposite way, from very simple organisms to ever-increasing organisms of self-organizing complexity.
Well, that's your interpretation. This goes back to the idea that humans are the best of the best, and that's just not what reality says. Humans are simply the best fit for a particular ecological niche in this particular moment in time and in this particular place. It doesn't mean that we're better than anything else. There is no better in this context. Religion is just humans telling stories designed to stroke the human ego. In fact, the one thing that science has been really good at proving is that humans just aren't that hot. We're just another species on a planet with millions and millions of others, all of us just trying to survive as we were programmed to do by evolution. Now, that's not very comforting for a lot of people, but too bad. Reality is what reality is. Just because you don't like it, that doesn't mean you just get to make up imaginary stories to make yourself feel better. But that's all that religion really is. It's emotionally frail people playing make-believe because they can't handle the way that things actually are. Why is this a supposed virtue? That's something I will never understand.
So if that didn't have an intelligent creator, we would have no way of understanding it at all. So if you look at creation, you realize why it was that Francis Collins, who headed the Human Genome Decoding Project began it as an atheist and ended it as a religious believer.
No, he became a Christian because he wandered out into the woods one day and saw a waterfall frozen in 3 parts, and for some reason he concluded that the only explanation was that there was an imaginary father figure in the sky. So when it comes to religion, Francis Collins is an idiot. Great scientist, really awful religious thinker. When you allow your feelings to get in the way that you view reality, you run into a whole lot of problems. You don't really matter that much. When you try to put yourself at the top of the pile, as religion invariably does, you just wind up looking like a complete dumbass. And that's exactly what Francis Collins does.
So if you look at creation, the simplest explanation, and I don't know of any other, for its fine-tuning for the emergence of life, is an intelligent creator. And you don't need to invoke doubtful concepts like intelligent design. There's just no other way of explaining how it happened to be like that.
Except, reality. This is where the puddle analogy fits in perfectly because it reveals exactly what the religious are doing wrong. He says that a creator is the simplest explanation for what we see, when it's actually anything but. You'd have to explain where this creator came from, and that's an infinitely more difficult proposition. This is why they just don't bother, because they just don't care. They don't even make an attempt. God is just magic thrown out there to explain things that they don't want to bother with. Don't think about it. It just is. It's the invented solution that answers all questions because they say that it does. And that's really, really dumb. We come back around to my 2 favorite questions. How do you know that? And how have you tested it to see if any of it is actually true? And both of those questions have the exact same answer when it comes to religion. They don't. They haven't. They just don't care. God is just a patch to cover their own ignorance. And that's kind of embarrassing, isn't it?
Secondly, in terms of revelation, the Torah. Look at Judaism. Jews are a tiny people, 14 million perhaps, in the world today.
I suppose, depending on how you want to count your Jews. According to Wikipedia, core Judaism, those people who are directly identifying as Jews, that number's about 15.2 million people, far below his 40 million estimate. You might be able to get up around 20 million if you just count anyone with a supposedly Jewish parent, and even counting everybody that is eligible for Israeli citizenship under the law of return, you only get up to about 23 million if you're lucky. Now, does that actually matter? No, not really, but I'm going for accuracy, whereas the rabbi seems to be going for fifis. If you start asking the really hardcore Jews, even the 15 million is far too many. When you're desperately trying to claim to be God's chosen people, the more people you let into your club, the more diluted your claim to fame becomes. But this is kind of irrelevant, so let's get back to the video.
And yet so powerful were the ideas of Torah that they inspired 2 other great religions, each of which took a part of Judaism, not the whole of it, but see themselves as worshipping the God of Abraham. And that comprises 2.4 billion Christians and 1.6 billion Muslims.
Which is just an appeal to popularity. Nobody cares. It's only true if it's actually true, and none of you people can show that the crazy things in your head are actually true. Because according to the Christians, the Jews got it wrong, and they finally got it right. And then the Muslims showed up, and they went on to say that both the Jews and the Christians are wrong, because now the Muslims have it right. I think you're all out of your minds, because I don't think any of you have any evidence that anything you say is right. Prove me wrong. Produce that evidence.
Far more than half the people alive today. Now, how was it that a man, Abraham, who lived almost 4,000 years ago, who commanded no armies, ruled no empire, performed no miracles, uttered no world-changing prophecies, his lessons are so pure and true and eternally valid that they have persuaded more than half the world's population, that is, not a single human being who has ever lived who had a greater influence. And if that is not proof through history, empirically, of the truth of Revelation, I don't know what is.
Then you don't really know a whole lot, Rabbi, do you? Just because people revere a person, that doesn't make said person worthwhile. We have lots and lots of cases of people throughout history that were followed and adored by throngs of people who turned out to be completely irrelevant. This is really just trying to take credit for religions that don't think your own got it right. There are more people out there right now that revere the name of Harry Potter than that revere the name of Abraham. Most Christians out there probably don't even know who Abraham is. They're too stuck on that Jesus guy, the ones you guys don't believe in. I'm not sure why we're supposed to think that any of this is impressive, because in reality, it's just not.
As for redemption, the great open societies of the West were built in the 17th century by people deeply immersed in the Hebrew Bible.
So what? There were people who, some for better and some for worse, created societies that didn't have a whole lot to do with religion in the long run. This is where the religious try to smuggle their theology into things that have absolutely nothing to do with it. It's why Christians try to claim that Western civilization was founded by Christians. So what? Western civilization has nothing at all to do with Christianity. In fact, Western civilization right now is increasingly secular, and more so as time goes on. Even for the Jews, they're losing market share over time. Going by recent Pew Research studies, the number of Jews on the planet is supposed to increase by just over 1 million between now and 2050, when the overall world population is on track to grow nearly 2 billion people. That's not impressive. It just isn't. You people have nothing to be proud of.
Whether they be John Milton and John Locke in England, or the great Calvinists in Scotland or in Holland, or the Puritans who made their way in the 1620s and 30s to America. These were all people inspired by Torah to build free societies with respect for human dignity and rights.
Except they weren't. These were all people following the Christian Bible, not the Jewish version. He's just trying to take credit for things that aren't his to claim. And I actually ran into a Muslim recently who tried to do the exact same thing. He said that Muslims represent about 4 billion people today, including the 2.3 billion Christians who just don't know they're Muslims yet. The stories that these people tell themselves to find emotional comfort is just ridiculous. And I think the rabbi here is doing largely the same thing.
And that is the clearest form of redemption that we've had. Every redemptive movement that has succeeded, and there have been plenty that failed, like the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, which were essentially secular movements. Every redemptive movement that's brought freedom to human beings and to human society has been based on the Torah, usually very explicitly.
I'd really love to see how he justified that, but yeah, I'm sure he won't. They never do. The Christian Old Testament isn't the Torah. That's just the first 5 books, the Pentateuch. The Old Testament includes a whole lot of other things that are a whole lot more important to Christians than the supposed books of Moses. That guy who wasn't actually real. Most Christians are only vaguely aware of what it says in the Bible before the book of Matthew. Because Judaism doesn't just go by the Torah. They go by the Talmud and the Midrash, as well as what the oral Torah, the teachings and rabbinic traditions that have been handed down across the generations by word of mouth. None of those things mean a damn thing to modern day Christians. So, Rabbi, you're just wrong.
So whether we look at creation or revelation or redemption, there can be, I think, no doubt that these things are all divine. They are the 3 ways that point us to God.
Except none of them do, as I've shown. How you choose to interpret them, that's entirely up to you. That doesn't make it actually so. Honestly, is this any different than all of the Christian and Muslim claims that we've seen around here all the time? All of these religions are doing the exact same thing, and the rabbi here, he's got a vested interest in believing that all of the stuff in his book, all of the stuff in his religion, that it's all true. But that doesn't make it true. He has to pretend that it is because, it's what he does for a living after all, but that doesn't make it so. These people get an emotional woody from thinking that their heartfelt beliefs must be true, and the second you step away from the blind faith and evaluate the claims based on evidence and rational critical thinking, it all falls completely apart. Everything that he tried to claim, none of it was demonstrably true. In fact, a lot of it was demonstrably false. These people don't understand that, and they really don't care, do they? So long as it makes them happy, they're going to go with it because feeling good, that's all they're really interested in. But that's just sad when you think about it. Reality exists beyond the ridiculous religious vacuum in your head. It doesn't matter what makes you happy. It matters what is actually true. And these people have deluded themselves to such a degree that I don't think they can identify reality anymore. And it's not just the rabbi, but it's all theists everywhere. They have all been conned into thinking that only their own inner comfort matters. They're just wrong and demonstrably so, but that doesn't seem to matter. It's why none of them ever get anywhere when talking to a skeptic. Because we're not interested in their fee-fees. We're only interested in their facts, and like it or not, none of them ever have any. I don't know what worse thing you can say for the delusionally faithful. It's not something that you should be proud of. Not at all.
Bum